Shulam Aleichem, we are up to Tez Vav Amid Beis. It's 2 lines from the wide lines. It's around 10 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah said that when you want to expand the Azara, you want to expand Yerushalayim, either one, there's a whole ceremonial procession you have to do. And one of the steps was Bezdin Mahalchin Ushtei Toidois Acharehen. Bezdin walks, and the toidas we saw yesterday, the lachmei toida, the chametz lachmei toida, 2 of them are behind them. Asks the Gemara, remember the bezdin kamet toida azli? You want to tell me that bezdin walks before in front of the toida? Vaksiv vayelech achareyem hoishaya v'chatzi sarei Yehuda. It says that they walked behind the toida, the lachmei toida, the shtei toidas. So how can you say they walked in front? So the Gemara says, Hochika Omar, Bezdin Mahalchin, Shtei Toidas Mahalchin, and Bezdin Nachareyem. You're right, you have to insert that Bezdin Mahalchin, Stam, Shtei Toidas Mahalchin, or Bezdin Nachareyem, Bezdin was behind the Shtei Toidas. So where it says, Ketzat Mahalchis, so what was the order of these 2 Toidas, the people carrying the Lachmei Toidas, the Chametz, how did they walk? Reb Chiv, Reb Shimon, Rabbi Chadamar, Zu Keneged Zu, V'Chadamar, Zu, Achar, Zu. So Yamachloikis Reb Chia and Reb Shimon, Rabbi, whether they were side by side or one in front of the other. Manda Amar Zu Keneged Zu, if you say they were side by side, then apnimis, when the Mishnah says that apnimis necheles, that's the pnimis which is closer to the chayma. So which means hachta mekarva l'chayma. Then it makes sense, because if you're side by side, there's one that's closer to the chayma and one's that one that's on the outer side. But if you say Mandam Zu Achar Zu, if you're going to tell me that the order was, the way they walked was one behind the other, so Hagda Apnimis, what does Apnimis mean? Hagda Mekarva LeBezdin, means the one that was closer to Bezdin. Right? So Bezdin was behind the 2 people carrying the Lachmei Toida, so the one that was Pnimis was the one that was closer to Bezdin. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Tanah, we looked in the Mishnah, Pnimis Necheles, the pnimis can be eaten. I understand if you say, according to the Manda Omer, that they walked one behind the other. I understand why the pnimis can be eaten. You know why? Because the chitzaina, the one that walks in front, the guy with the lechem, chametz of the toida that walks in front of the pnimi, already was mekadesh that makom, and once he's mekadesh that makom, so you have no problem of kachem b'chutz, kachem chutz. You know why? Because the pnimis is already stepping on to holy ground. The chitzaina is the one that's mekadesh it, and the pnimis is the one that's walking behind him already on ground that was niskadesh. So therefore, you can eat the pnimis. There's no problem of yaitza. Of the kachim that are going out of Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, but if you say that they're walking side by side, then they're both being mekadesh at the same time. So how can you possibly eat one of them? Or it should be both equal. Either they should both be burnt because they're both mekadesh the place as they're walking there, so they're yaitza, it's possible be yaitza, or they're not niskadesh because it's bebasachas, it's coming bebasachas, and memela, they should both be necheles. That's the kasha. If it's zu keneged zu, then one is not better than the other, right? They're side by side, so either they're both psul yaitza, or they're both possible yaitza, or they are both necheles because the kedusha and the helicha is coming bebasachas. Says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me so, what do you mean? According to you, that one is walking in front of the other, why is the pnimis necheles? Pnimis can't be necheles if one is behind the other. You can't tell me because the chitzayin already is mekadesh that makom, because one lechem can't be mekadesh it. You need 2. right? It says al kol shelenasis b'chol elu. You need all of them. You need the entire procession to pass by that piece of karka in order for it to be niskadish. And as long as it didn't pass by, because Bezdin is still behind them, right? So then even the pnimis is no better than the chitzayna. They both shouldn't be able to be eaten. So the Gemara says vafil aman de omar. Now we said you need all of them. As we'll see in a moment, we'll see in the Gemara. In the next daf, Tazayin, today's daf, still it means you only need one of them. If you only have one, let's say you just have the Urim V'Tumim, just the Kohen, just the Melech, just the Bezdin, just the Sanhedrin, that's enough to be Mekadosh the Mokim. But Hanut Tervayu Chod Mitzvah. These breads are both Chod Mitzvah. They're one. They're considered one. They're Shtei Lach Metoida. So the question is, how is it possible to treat one Ela Omar Rabbi Yochanan? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Al Pinovi Nacheles Val Pinovi Nasrefes. You know why? Taka doesn't have a tam, doesn't have a reason. Be'etzim, they should both be equal, right? Either they should both be pasul b'yoytza, because it's not the skadish yet, even as they both pass by, because you need the entire procession, the ceremony to end before you can eat it. But the reason why it's necheles, the pnim is necheles, because it's al pinovi necheles val pinovi nesrefes. It's based on Nevuah. Rashi says which neviim Chagi Zechariah Malachi Yisham. They're the neviim achroinim. V'al piyam beruach hakodesh asu. They were beruach hakodesh. They were telling the people that no, this is what the Rebbe Shalom wants. Pnim is necheles, chitzayin nesrefes ve'ein tam bedover. And there's no real logic to this. And we know, we learned in Sanhedrin that Lamaisa, if a Navi comes and tells you to be mevatel a mitzvah of the Torah, if it's just a Hiraz Shah, which this is, right? Because you're being mevatel a mitzvah of Psul Yotzah, it's possible Yotzah really. So how could the Navi say you should eat the pnimis? You're not allowed to eat it. Teretz is that a Navi can do that. It's Beruach HaKodesh. As long as it's a Hiraz Shah, they're not being mevatel a mitzvah forever, then they can do it. All right.
Avodah Zarah was the one exception.
Avodah Zarah was one exception. Right. That's right. Yeah. It's interesting because the Rambam, if you take a look at the Rambam paskins that in this procession, the Rambam says one of them is eaten and the other is burnt. The Rambam doesn't say pnimis echitzayna. And they ask on the Rambam, what do you mean? The Mishnah says pnimis echitzayna, right? Pnimis necheles echitzayna nesrefes. Ram says it could be either or, right? It doesn't have to be the pnimis that's necheles and the chitzayna which is nesrefes. So it's a kasha. So they say, to answer this discussion of the Rambam, they say the Rambam learned the Gemara differently. He says Elo Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says Al pi novi necheles, Al pi novi nesrefes. The Gemara doesn't say which one. Al pi novi necheles. The novi doesn't just tell you that the pnimis can always be necheles. It wasn't just Chagi Zechariah Malachi said, they set the standard. Oh, pnimis should always be necheles. We follow that. Al pi novi necheles, the novi decides which one you should eat. It happens to be in those days, in that time, Chagi Zechariah Malachi said the necheles is the pnimis and the chitzayin is nesrefes. But the truth is, it's not just that the novi is telling you that the pnimis is necheles, like that the pnimis could be necheles and the chitzayin could be nesrefes. They're also telling you which one is necheles, which is nesrefes, according to the Rambam. It's very interesting. Okay, Zog the Gemara weiter. Kol shelenasus b'chol elu. The Mishnah said, if you're missing this procession of Melech, Navi, Urim, V'Tumim, Sanhedrin, Shtei Toides, and shiur, right? All those criteria, these protocols, then, if you walk into that part of the Azara that wasn't the Skadish in that order, in that way, then you're not Chai the carbon. Says the Gemara, Itmer Ravuna b'chol elu tanan. We learned b'chol elu. Rav Nachman Omar, ba'achas mikol elu. Rav Nachman says, you only need one of them. As long as you have either a Melech, or a Navi, or Urim V'Tumim, or Sanhedrin, then you're good to go. That's Mekadesh, the Tosefes Seir, or the Tosefes Azara. So Gemara says, what's the crux? I don't want to say the crux, oh gosh. A long time ago we spoke about this. Yeah, Oivai. What's the Yesoid? What? The essence of the Machloikas. Ravuna Amar B'chol Elu Tanan. Why? Because he holds L'shitazik Sovar, Kedushas Yerushalayim, Kitcher L'Shaita, V'Kitcher L'Asid Lavai. When David HaMelech and Shlomo were Mekadesh Yerushalayim the Makam HaMikdash, they are Mekadesh it forever and ever, even for future generations. The Ezra and Ezra Zecher Ba'alma David. Ezra didn't really need to be Mekadesh again, Yerushalayim, the Beis Mikdash, when he came back from Bavel. The only reason he did it was Zecher Ba'alma. So Mila, since he only did it as Zecher Ba'alma, so even though, so therefore he didn't really need everything, because there's no Urim V'Tumim at the time of Ezra, right? So he didn't have it. So really, you need Kol Elu. Ezra didn't have it. Ezra didn't need it because Zecher Ba'alma David, because it was already in a Skadish al Yedei David and Shlomo, because Kedushas Yerushalayim Kitchel Shayta Kitchel Asad Lavai. Rav Nachman Omer Ba'achas Mikol Elu Tanan Ksaver Kedushas Yerushalayim Kitchel Shayta V'Loi Kitchel Asad Lavai. He says no, it has to be that all you need is one. Why? Because Ezra Kedusha Kaddish Avagav Lava Urim V'Tumim. In the times of Ezra, there's no Urim V'Tumim. There's no Urim V'Tumim. So how is Ezra Mekadesh the place? You can't use the Kedusha Rishayna because you use Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, V'loi Kitchel L'Asad Lavai. So if Ezra was Mekadesh it again, because he had to, how could he if he didn't have Urim V'Tumim? It must be, you don't need all of it. As long as you have some or one, you're good to go. That's Beseder Gomer. Lamaisa, this idea of Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, Kitchel Asad Lavai is a big sugya in a few places in Shas, and the Rambam paskins Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, V'loi Kitchel Asad Lavai. It was not with Niskadish L'Asad Lavai, right? He's talking about Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is never Niskadish L'Asad Lavai. The Makam HaMikdash, the Beis HaBechira, that was forever, but right, the two Kedusha Rishayna, two conversations really. One is for Eretz Yisrael, and one is for Yerushalayim, the Beis HaMikdash, the Azara, Harabayas. So the Rambam passes Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, V'loi Kitchel Asad Lavai. Kedusha Shniya, right, when Ezra was Makadesh it, then that was Oile Bavel, Oile Mitzrayim didn't last. Oile Bavel, that last. Ezra's Kedusha lasted forever. And there's a lot of raid exactly as to what the difference is in the Rambam. Why is the Rambam Pasuk Kedusha Rishayna? It seems like, at first glance, Yeshua was l'chayra on a higher level than Ezra. So how come Yeshua's Kedusha Rishayna, when it came into Eretz Yisrael, that didn't last, and when Ezra came, that did last. That Kitchel L'Shaita v'Kitchel Asad Lavai. So many pshatim, the Reb Chaim, Kibush, Chazaka. There's different types that did it in different ways. But I heard from Reb Tzuli Bornstein, and I also heard from Rabbi Rasner, the Gedolah Megidei Shiurim. Some of the Gedolah Megidei Shiurim in Daf Yomi, they bring down a Meshech Chacham in Parshas B'Shalach that says that actually it's precisely because Yeshua, the Kedusha of the first group, the Olam Mitzrayim, was in such a high level that it was lost. The higher the Kedusha is, the easier it's lost, the more vulnerable it is. And so Mamela, it could be lost easier if it's a higher level of Kedusha. He brings an example, actually, an analogy. He says that the halacha is that a kohenes, right, she's entitled to eat truma, but if she's nefselis lepasul, if she has be with a pasul, somebody's pasul to, then she becomes disqualified from eating truma, as opposed to a levia, who usually would be entitled to meiser, right? The Levim get meiser rishon. If she is nefselis, if she has be with somebody that's asr, then she still is entitled to meiser. So why? What's the difference? L'chayra kehenes, kahuna has higher kedusha. How come she loses that privilege so fast? The answer is because her kedusha is greater, and the greater the kedusha is, the easier it is to lose it. And that's pshat in the Rambam al derech machshava. The Rambam says, Paskas, Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, V'loi Kitchel Asad Lavai, because it was in such a high level of Kedusha that it was lost right away. And maybe you could tell too, the Luchas Rishaynas and the Luchas Shnias based on that. Just thinking as I'm saying it right now. The Luchas Rishaynas were lost immediately with the Egel, right? It was broken right away. And the Luchas Shnias, look what we've done since Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Luchas. I'm saying it's been so many years, and Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, Senas Chinam, Gimel Chamuris, and yet the Luchas Shnuyas, the bracha and the Torah that we've received from Luchas Shnuyas is still Kayim. Could be the same idea.
The exact house it's for by Luchas because it was given the tzinah, and not as
Right, so Rashi in Chumash says, that that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did, Luchas Shniyos, was for Hesin B'tzina. But based on this Meshech Chachma, what could be is another angle, another pshat based on this machshava, that the Kedushas Yerushalayim is much more holy, and therefore it's lost much more easily. And that's what happened to the Luchas, that's why Kehenes is different than Leviah. Okay, says the Gemara. Esevei Rava Rav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman is the one who says all you need is one item on the list. Achas mikol elu is enough. Asks the Gemara. Esevei Rava Rav Nachman. Kol shalei nasis b'chal elu. Shteitach in the Mishnah that you need kol elu. Kol shalei nasis b'chal elu is not enough. Says the Gemara. Tani ba'achas mikol elu. Okay, is magia the Mishnah. Toshma b'sholei mishnei bitznei bar mishcha. There were two areas in the Har Mishcha, Har Zeisim. Tachtoina ve'elyoina. Tachtoina, the lower area in Eskachu, B'chal Elu. B'mei Bayis Rishon, they had all of those items that is mentioned in the list of the Mishnah that you need to expand the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, of the Har Bayis or the Azara. That Tachtoina, that lower level of Har Zeisim was Niskadish B'chal Elu, had all of those items on the list. But the upper level didn't have it. Elo ba'olei goyla shaloi b'melech v'shaloi b'urim v'tumim. They didn't have a melech when they were mekadesh in the beginning of Bayis Sheni, when they came back from Bavel. They didn't have a melech, they didn't have urim v'tumim. So tachtoina shoyse kedushas gemura. The tachtoina that the kedusha was mamish kedusha gemura. Yeah, then Ame Ors Nichnasim Lasham V'Oichnasham Kacham Kalam Avoloi Ma'aser Sheni. Ame Ratzim would eat over there Kacham Kalam, but not Ma'aser Sheni. Why were they makpid on Ma'aser Sheni? Rashi says because Ame Ratzim was reason to treat Ma'aser Sheni and fulfill that mitzvah, the mitzvah min amufcher. Why? Because they heard Aser B'Shvil Shetis Asher, so they were very makpid. They wanted Ashiras. And also, they needed to be mesvada. It says asisi k'chalash tivesoni. It says, right, ma'aseh deganachas rosh chitzirecho. You have to eat lafnei Hashem alakecha. So they wanted to mamish be machmer behidder gomor b'chdei shetes asher. So they didn't rely b'chlal even on tachtoini, even though tachtoini was niskadish b'kedusha gemura from b'mei bayis rishon. They had all of those tanoim that is mentioned in the Mishnah. Still, they wanted to be machmer on the ma'aseh sheni to come mamish into Yerushalayim proper. Amanas l'kabel pras. V'chaveirim oichlin sham kachum kalam ma'aseh sheni. But l'maaseh, the Talmidei Chachamim, they understood there's no difference. Since that expansion had all the tanoim necessary by my base rishon, so it had mamish the kedusha gemura of Yerushalayim. El yoina shaloi kedushas gemura. The Elyoina, which didn't have Kedusha Gemura, because that was only niskadish by the Oile Bavel, which didn't have a Melech and Urim V'tumim. So there, they're makel by Kacham Kalam, because it didn't have the pras that Raki's talking about. Avaloi Ma'aser Sheni, but not Ma'aser Sheni, because Ma'aser Sheni, they take a machmer, and they mamish went into Yerushalayim proper. V'chaveirim, but the Talmidei Chachamim, ein oichlin sham aloi Kacham Kalam, aloi Ma'aser Sheni. It didn't even Kacham Kalam over there. Why? Because it wasn't niskadish by Kedusha Gemura. Meaning that Meratzim, if they couldn't find somewhere to stay in Yerushalayim proper, or even in the expansion of Yerushalayim, in the area that was discarded by Oile Mitzrayim, which is Kedusha Gemura, they were makel on Kacham Kalam and ate it in the Elyoina part, which wasn't discarded by Kedusha Gemura because they were makel on these types of halachas. But to Ma'aser Sheni, they were machmer on. But Chaveirim never ate anything outside of Yerushalayim proper and the expansion of Oile Mitzrayim, because by Oile Bavel, the area of Elyoina of Oile Bavel wasn't the Skadish B'Kedusha Gemura. Anyways, the Gemara says like this: so Taka, why wasn't the Elyoina part? Why wasn't the Skadish B'Kedusha Gemura? Right? Because you need all of it. So what do you see from here? You see a kasha under of Nachman, a brisa that says that you couldn't eat kachim kalim or ma'aser sheni in the elyoina part of the Har Mishcha. Why not? Because it wasn't the skadish with all the tanoim that is mentioned in the Mishnah. So how could Rabbi Nachman say ba'achas mikol elu? So it says lamek yeshua Amrit like Ketshua, Lamed Ketshua, Amrit like Ketshua. You're like wrong. What do you mean Lamed Ketshua? Why were they Mekadesh the Elyon? I just said like Ketshua. The Gemara just interrupts the flow to ask on the last two words of the Brisa. Gemara says no. You have to be Mishana the Nusach and Lamech Nesua. Why did they bring it into? Why did the Oile Bavel bother to expand that Elyoina area into the ear of Yerushalayim, and they were makifet with a chayma if they anyways couldn't be mekadesh it b'kedusha gemur because they didn't have all of the items on the list that's necessary. So the Gemara says no, that's a technical reason. Because it was an open area in Yerushalayim and it was high up and noichel lekavish misham, and it was easy for enemies to conquer Yerushalayim from there. So therefore they didn't want to leave it open. So they included it into the chayma. But still, you see from this brisa that you needed to Nortim Niskadish Kedusha Gemura, you needed all of the items on the list. That's a Kashtan of Nachman. Says the Gemara Tanoi. The emes is, you're right, you have a brisa disproving Rav Nachman, but it's a machlokes Tanoim. Rav Nachman holds like the other Tana. Where's the other Tana? That not Omer Rebbe Eliezer Shemati Shai Boinen Behechal, when they were building, when the Oile Bavel came back and started construction. Bimei Ezra on the Heichal, Asu Kloim LaHeichal, Kloim LaZoris. They made curtains to the Heichal and Kloim to the Azoris, curtains to the Azoris. Yeah. Ela Shebeheichal Boinen Mebechutz. They put the curtains by the Heichal outside of the walls. Uba Azoris Boinen Mebefnim. And by the Azoris, they put the curtains inside. Why did they do it differently? Why was the Kloim of the Heichal inside?
Because they serve different purposes.
So Rashi says two pshat. Rashi says one pshat is shlo yizunu einayim in a Heichal. We're supposed to look into the Heichal. And at this point, the Gemara also understands Rabbi Eliezer. The reason behind it was to be machshir the azara for akrovas karbanos. So you needed to have the vilainus, you needed to have the kloim, the curtains inside the heichal, on the inside. And the azara was enough on the outside. Okay, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati shemakriven afu pishaim bias. He heard from his rabbis, Rabbi Yeshua says, that you can be makriv karbonos lemizbeach even though there's no heichal. Oichlan kachik kudishem afal pi she'ein kloim. You don't need to have kloim to be makriv to surround the azara, the makam azara. You can eat kachik kudishem in the azara even without it being surrounded. Kachim kalam ma'aseh. Also, api she'ein chayma. Right, you have to eat in Yerushalayim, so you don't need the chayma to be matir to eat kachim kalam ma'aseh in Yerushalayim. Mipnei shekedusha rishayna kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha la'asid lavai. Kedusha rishayna kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha la'asid lavai. That's why. So what do you see from here? So the Gemara says lav mechlad Rabbi Eliezer savar loy kitcha la'asid lavai. From the fact that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua are put together in the same Mishnah, the Mishnah Adyas, and Rabbi Yeshua says that you don't need the kloim because Kedusha Rishon is already kitchel shaita v'kitchel asad lavoi, and Rabbi Eliezer says you do need the kloim. Why? Because it's presumably because it's like kitchel asad lavoi, so you need the kloim to kind of complete that binyan to mekadesh it. Gemara says, so you see, it's a machlekes tanam. So Rav Nachman will tell you, you know what? I hold that Kedusha Rishona kitchel shaita v'kitchel asad lavoi. I hold like Rabbi Yeshua, and that's why achas mikol elu is enough. You don't need all of those items on the list. I'm sorry. Kitcher shani kitcher loy kitcher asid lavoi. I'm sorry, it's the opposite way. It's loy kitcher asid lavoi, like Rabbi Eliezer, and if it's loy kitcher asid lavoi, that's why it's enough with one of them. Because how else could they have done it? How else could they have been mekadesh it? You can't rely on the kedusha rishayna, so it must be that one of them is enough. Achas mikol elu is enough. How do you know this is their machlokes dilma the kula alma? Maybe everybody holds kedusha shayna kitchel l'shaita v'kitchel l'asud lavai. Maybe everybody holds kedusha shayna is l'shaita and l'asud lavai. Umar my deshmiya leika Omar. Umar my deshmiya leika Omar. Everybody's just quoting their rebbes, but not that there is such a fundamental machlokes between them. And if you'll ask me, Kloim Rabbi Eliezer, Lamali, let's news about why do you need Kloim? Truth is, Rabbi Eliezer agrees to Rabbi Yeshua can makar without Kloim because Kedushas Yerushalayim kitchel shaita kitchel asid lavai. But it's only it's news about so you shouldn't. It's not roy. It's not bechavadig for people to be able to steer into the heichal and the azara, and the azara should be open for everyone to see, and that's why they surrounded it. But everybody holds kitchel shaita kitchel asid lavai. In the Mela, you don't have a teretz to Rav Nachman because Rav Nachman has to anchor himself in a Tana that holds Kedushas Yerushalayim kitchel shaita v'loy kitchel asid lavai. Says the Gemara lahani tanoi. No, it's a different machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, Amr Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. Shmuel bar Yosi said, "Lo mamanu chachamim es elu shekshaolu bnei agoyla." Why did they count all these ayoris that are makafes chayma? The Mishnah Erichin counts 8 cities that are makafes chayma and Moshe Yeshua ben Nun. So why dafka these? So the Mishnah says shekshaolu bnei agoyla matzu elu the kitchen, because when the bnei agoyla, the bnei Bavel, the Oile Bavel came back, B'nai Ezra, they found these cities and they're Mekadosh them. Aval Rishonis, but the other cities that were Mekafas Chaim Moshe Yeshua ben Nun, Batlu Mishabatla Aretz. That was in this battle, the Kedusha, once the Churban happened, Churban Bayis Rishon happened. Alma, what do you see from here? Ksova Kedusha Rishon Kitchel Shaita, Veloy Kitchel Asid Lavai. So Kitzur Amaisa, what do you see? That unless Oile Bavel were Mekadosh it again, it doesn't carry the same Kedusha. What do you mean Kedusha Rishayna? Let's say Kedusha Rishayna lasted for forever. The answer is it doesn't. See, for me, Kitchel Shaita, look Kitchel Asid Lavai, that's a raya too. It's a raya to Rav Nachman. Okay, so the Gemara, one second. So you found me Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi, who says, Loi Kitchel Asid Lavai. Have a stira. Amr Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. This is a brisa that's Mefarish the Mishnah Erichin. Elu Belvad Hoyu. Were there only 8 cities that Mekafas Chaimim and Moshe Yeshua ben Nun when they came back from Bavel? Well, the Kvar Nemar, Shishim Ir Kol Chevel Argav Mamlechas Egba Bashan Kol Eila Arim B'Tzuras Chaim Gvoya. What do you mean? It says there were 60 cities that were Mekafas Chaimim and Moshe Yeshua ben Nun. Elam Manu Chachamim as Elu. So why did they only count in the Mishnah Erich and they enumerated only these 8? Shekshaolu Bnei Agoyla Matzu Elu v'Kitchem. So Gemara says Kitchem Hashtar Min L'Kamon. You just told me they didn't have to mekadosh it. The brisa, which is going to be brought in a second, brisa ends off. They didn't have to mekadosh those 8. Elomatzu elu umanim. They found these and they counted these cities because that's what they found. V'loy elu bilvad, and the brisa is mamshich. V'loy elu bilvad el kol shetala biyadcha mesoyros ma'avesecha. Anything you have a mesoyra from your parents, your grandparents, from your kafes chayim Moshe Yeshua ben Nun, kol mitzvahs elu noigas b'ap nitnei shekedusha Yerushalayim kitchel shaita kitchel asid lavai, because it does last for forever. So you have a stira kashi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi, Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. So now you have a contradiction in Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. In the first brisa, we have Shmuel bar Yosi on that Mishnah that the Chachamim counted those 8 cities. It sounds like he holds loy kitchel asid lavai. That's why they only counted those 8, because the other ones. The other ones weren't niskadish like the Oile Bavel, and the Mela is Batla Kedushasan. So you see, Loi Kitchel Asid Lavai. And this last brisa we just mentioned sounds like, no, it was Kitchel Ashaita Kitchel Asid Lavai. As long as you have a Mesorah Mavesecha that was Mekafas Chaima, it's good to go. So Gemara says, you could say there's Machloik is exactly what the Shita of Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi was. You by say Mechadim Inayu Rabbi Lozer bar Yosi Amri. Could be one of them. You have to just change the name. It's not Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi, it's Rabbi Lozer bar Yosi. Titania, look the Brisa Rabbi Lozer bar Yosi Omer, Asher loy chayma, says loy Kriyan Aksiv, says loy vav aleph. So the Gemara says, right, loy vav, and it's read as loy aleph. Says, no, I think it's ksiv as loy aleph, right? Even though it doesn't have now, but it had before, then it's enough. Why? Because Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel Ashaita, v'Kitchel Asid Lavai. So you see here, a Machlokes Tanoim, bottom line, a Machlokes Tanoim, where the Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel Ashaita, is Kitchel Asid Lavai, Lo Kitchel Asid Lavai, and the Nafkamina would be If you're saying loy kitchel asad lavai, that means that Ezra Oilei Bavel had to be mekadosh it again, and they couldn't be mekadosh again with all the items mentioned in the Mishnah. Why? Because they didn't have a Ur V'tumim. So it must be that achas mikal elu is enough. So this is the big nafkamina between one of the big nafkaminas in the machloikas, in the shas machloikas of Kedushas Yerushalayim, kitchel shaita, kitchel asad lavai or not. One of the nafkaminas would be whether you need all of the items in the Mishnah on the list for being Mekadesh, any expansion you want to make to the Azorah or to Yerushalayim. All right. Zug the Gemara weiter.
We're talking about the other cities that they became Kodesh, not just the Azorah and Yerushalayim.
So Machloikas, what happened to the other cities that is not mentioned? You mean the other, besides for the 8 cities that are mentioned in the Mishnah and Erechim?
No, those 8 cities are not part of Yerushalayim.
Those 8 cities, Stam, we're talking about, it's a different halacha over there. Legabe Bate Arechaima. It's a different halacha with regard to Bate Arechaima. And, the halacha of Bate Arechaima is only if there has Kedusha. It has to have Kedusha. So if Kedushas Yerushalayim, Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Asad Lavoi, so all the cities that were Mekafas Chayim and Yeshua Benun, then that is included in the halacha of Bate Arechaima. But if you hold Kedushas Yerushalayim, Kitchel Shaita, but like Kitchel Asad Lavoi, then that will not be included in the din of Bate Arechaima. That will not be included in the din of Bate Arechaima. By the way, what is the din of Bate Arechaima? We didn't explain it. If somebody sells a house in a city that's Mekefes Chaimim and Moshe Yeshua Benun, he's allowed to redeem it. He has 1 year that he can redeem it. And if he didn't redeem it in that year, then he loses it forever. Let's mises.
If it's close to Yovel, right?
Let's mises forever. And as opposed to a bias that was nimkar in a city that's not Mekefes Chaimim, that you could be paid any time. And if you weren't paid until Yovel, then it goes back to the Bailam B'Yovel. I believe that the Bate Arechaim, it's forever. No, Yovel doesn't return it. Let's mises.
Karka Mishpacha and the other fine details of those halachas.
I have to check into that. Is that, you know the halacha by Bate Arechaim? If it's forever and ever, like if it's a bias, I'm sure it's Mefurish. Huh? Okay, it's something before that I don't know, but yeah.
Well, isn't that the machlekes? Well, it's a little different. Kenyan Paris, Kenyan Guftami. Whether or not who owns the land.
Right.
That determines who owns the land.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
Maybe that makes a difference. I don't know. I mean, who has Bibles over the land of Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael in general?
You saying this has to do with Kenyan Paris, Kenyan Agov?
Maybe. We're talking about the expansion, right?
No, we're talking about the din of Bate Arechaim. The whole mission in Erichin is talking about the din of Bate Arechaim. The din of Bate Arechaim has a different din. If somebody sells his house in a bias that's Mekafes Chaim Moshe Benun, then he has 1 year, 12 months to redeem it. And if he doesn't redeem it, then it goes out of his family's possession, latzmises forever. As opposed to somebody who sells his house in a city that's not Mukaf Chaim and Moshe Benun, then he can redeem it at any time. And if he hasn't redeemed it till Yovel, it goes back in Yovel. That's the din, right? So here the Mishnah Erechim enumerates the 8 cities that Oilei Bavel, when they came back from Bavel, they count 8 cities that were Kafes Chaim Moshe Benun. And it says, K'sha'olu b'nei Agoyla matzu elu v'kitcham. Right, they found these Mekafes Chaim, these cities are Mekafes Chaim, and they're Mekadesh it again. The question is, why did they Mekadesh it again? It's Kedushas Yerushalayim, Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Asad Lavoi. That's the machlekes, whether they Mekadesh it again or not. Whether they Mekadesh it again or not. So, if you say they're Mekadesh it again, that means it's like Kitchel Asad Lavoi. So Eilo Bavel had to be Mekadesh it again. If you hold they weren't Mekadesh again, it's just Monam, it's not Kitchum. It's Monam, they just counted it. They didn't have to Mekadesh it. Means that it was Kitchel Asad Lavoi also. It's always Kaddish. And any city you have a Messiah on that's Kaddish, you're good to go. But the point is, we have a Machlikas Tanoim. We have 2 brises. One is Rabbi Lozer Rabbi Yossi, one is Rabbi Rabbi Yossi, but the Kedushas Yerushalayim, Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Asad Lavoi, and that's the Machlikas Amirom over here, where they need Achas Mikal Elu, or you need Kal Elu. Okay, weiter. Says the Gemara, Nitma Ba'azor v'nel amena Tumah. Asks the Gemara, Tumah Ba'azor minolon. How do I know that somebody is Nitma Ba'azor? He's Chayiv, a carbon oil of a yored. How do we know this? Rashi says, why should it be any different than somebody who walks into the Azara B'tumah? What do you mean, how do I know that? Rashi says, no, because somebody walks into the Azara B'tumah, that's the pasuk, V'lo yetamu es machanehem. Don't be mitama the machana. In other words, you're already tameh. Don't be mitama once you're already tameh and walk into the Azara. But over here, it doesn't fit with the words V'lo yetamu es machanehem. It's not included in that lav. So how did you get to this isser that you can't stay in the Azara if you became tameh in the Azara? On Rabbi Lozer, Kasev Echad Oimeres Mishkan Hashem Timei. One pasuk says the mitama the Mishkan Hashem. The Kasev Echad Oimer Kies Migdash Hashem Timei. 2 pesukim. Why need 2 pesukim for? Right? If you don't need the second pasuk for Toma Shebechutz, because I know that already, so use it for somebody who's Nitma Be'azar Toma Shebefnim. That's also aser. Ikroy miyatra ask the Gemara. You want to it's an extra pasuk because you have 2 pesukim. It's extra. I need the second pasuk for a different halacha. The Tanya Rabbi Lozer says, "Im never mishkan lo menem mikdash. Never mikdash lo menem mishkan." Why does it say mishkan and mikdash? Right? In one pasuk it says mishkan Hashem timei. The other pasuk says mikdash Hashem timei. So why does it change? The Gemara says mikdash. Im never mikdash lo menem mishkan. Im never mishkan lo menem mikdash. Im never mikdash lo menem mishkan. It says the Gemara ilu never mishkan v'lo never mikdash. If it wouldn't have said Mikdash Yisa'im with the second pasuk Yisa'im al Mishkan Yechayev Shem Yishuch B'Shem Mishcha, I would have said that only the Mishkan should be Chayev because it has a level of kedusha, the kedusha of Mashiach B'Shem Mishcha. That's how the Mishkan was the Skadish. V'al HaMikdash Lo Yechayev because it has a lesser kedusha. It wasn't the Skadish B'Shem Mishcha. If it never Mikdash, if it would just have said Mikdash, if it Lo Never Mishkan Yisa'im Al Mikdash Yechayev Shekdushas Kedushas Olam. It's forever. Al Mishkan Lo Yechayev, and you shouldn't be chayev on the Mishkan because it's not Kedushas Olam. What's Kedushas Olam? Rashi says there's no heter bamis. Once the Beis Hamikdash was built, the heter bamis was ceased, was stopped for forever. You never have a heter to be makar of a carbon on a bama. That's what Kedushas Olam means. Tosfos argues, and Tosfos says Kedushas Olam means that the Kedusha lasted for a longer time than the Mishkan. Either way, you have Kedushas Olam, so that's a svara to say that Nitma Ba'azar and the Mikdash is more chamer than Mishkan. L'kachanam Mishkan, l'kachanam Mikdash. That's why you need both. Mar says Rabbi Lozer, so I need the extra pasuk. I can't. How do you know to darshan from the extra pasuk? Maybe the extra pasuk is teaching me that Mishkan and Mikdash, that they're both usher to walk into B'tumah, but not if you nitma ba'azara, that doesn't count, right? Because you don't have an extra pasuk for nitma ba'azara. So Mishkan ikra Mikdash and Mikdash ikra Mishkan, both called interchangeable. Mishkan is called Mikdash, Mikdash is called Mishkan. Nichtav o'idivi Mikdash, o'idivi Mishkan. So right, by both psukim write Mikdash, and by both psukim write Mishkan. And I would know from the extra pasuk what you mean, because they're both called the same. So the Gemara says Mishkan and Mikdash only. Why are you changing the language from one pasuk to the next? Shema Manatarti. So that teaches you both halachas. Number one, that you're not allowed to walk into either the Mishkan or the Mikdash B'tumah. That I know from the double pasuk. And also, even if you nitma ba'azara, that I know from the change of language from Mishkan to Mikdash. Gemara says, Bishlam Mikdash ikra Mishkan. I understand. You just told me that Mikdash is called Mishkan. It says by the Mikdash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to rest, dwell His presence. That's Mishkan. Well, Mishkan ikra Mikdash. How do I know that Mishkan is called Mikdash? Minolan. Ilim mitchsev. V'nasa kasim noisa Mikdash. That the kasim carry the Mikdash, and it's referring to the Mishkan over there. Hahu ba'araksev. That's talking about the Aron. The Aron is taka kodesh, right? The Aron, the klei kodesh. Elo ma'achav asli Mikdash chati b'soicham. It says by the Mishkan, Mikdash. It says Mikdash. So you see the Mishkan is also called a Mikdash. Gavaldig. Says the Gemara weiter. The Mishnah says that if you nitma ba'azara, if you remain in the Mikdash B'tumah and you're Meshtachava or you're Shah Kidei Hishtachava, or even if you're Meshtachava physically, but you spent the amount of time in the Mikdash B'tumah, the amount of time it takes to be Meshtachava. Amar Rava, Lo Yishanu Elo Sheshtachava Klapa Pnim. When did we say that you're a Shtachava, you're Chayev, even if you weren't Shoya Kashir Shtachava Gemura? That's only if you're mishtachve klape pnim. Aval mishtachve klape chutz. But if you bow down klape chutz, what's klape pnim? Klape pnim means letzad heichel. You're facing the heichel. So if you're mishtachve letzad ma'ir, if you're facing the heichel, then that doesn't require an entire shiur of shah kadesh tachava. Even if you did it quickly, right? You didn't have that amount of time. You're also chayiv. But mishtachve klape chutz, if you were facing your back was to the heichal, it's klape chutz, then shah and loy shah loy. Then you need kadesh shehiyah. Ikad masla seifa. Some say that Rava said this on the seifa, not on the reisha of the shtachava. He said it on the seifa of the Mishnah. Oisha shavach de shtachava mechlal de shtachava gufa boy shehiyah. Sounds like a shtachava itself needs shehiyah. Am Rava leishana shtachava klape chutz. That's only when do you need the shiur shehiyah for a shtachava. You have to be chayiv. That's if you're facing the chutz. Aval klape pnim. But if you're facing the heichel, afagav de loisha, even if you weren't shaya, you're still chayiv on the ishtachavo. Even if you weren't shaya that year, v'achakam ishtachva klape pnim, oy sheshok de ishtachavo, behach ishtachavo de klape chutz chayiv. Right? Either you're mishtachva ishtachavo mu'etes, not complete, but you're mishtachva even a little bit, and you weren't shaya, you didn't spend the amount of time it takes for ishtachavo gemura, you left immediately, you're still chayiv if it's klape pnim. But if you left, if you didn't do that, if you klape chutz, you didn't do that, then you're not chayiv unless you're shaya shir kadesh tachavoya. What's really interesting is that these two lashonos really there's no enough kamina lahalacha between these two lashonos. At least the way Rashi understands these two lashonos, the way he explained it right now, which is a big chiddush. Usually, when we bring two lashonos, usually there's enough kamina lahalacha. These two gersois have no enough kamina lahalacha. It's a little bit of a chiddush. So l'maisa, if you look at the achronim, they bring on the bottom over here the chasam sofer, the chaznish. They're mafarish the sugi a little bit differently, and they come out with enough kamina lahalacha between these two gersois. So now the Gemara asks, "Heichadoma ishtachavoy de izba shehiyah." What do you have? How do you have ishtachavoy de izba shehiyah? Heichadoma ishtachavoy de lesba shehiyah. The Gemara says like this: the lesba shehiyah is a kriya ba'almahi. The one that doesn't have a shehiyah and you're chayiv if it's klape pnim, that is a kriya ba'alma. The izba shehiyah is pishet yadayim v'raglayim. That's pishet yadayim v'raglayim. Well, let's see. What's a kriya? What's pishet yadayim v'raglayim? What do you got over there? Let's see. So you have.
This is pishet yadayim v'raglayim.
Kriya. What's? Oh, this is pishet yadayim v'raglayim. Take a look at the picture over here, doctor. Look over here. Shtachavoya. You have that.
3 times.
Right? That's mamish. Do we do that ever?
No, because we don't want it to be. We don't want to look like that we're
the next one will
going
look
outside of the Zora.
So we don't do that. That kind of pishet yadayim we don't do. And what's kriya? The kriya is this is kriya.
Kriya, yeah, this is.
This is the kriya where you're on your knees. Okay. So now the Gemara wants to know, what about, go back to the other picture, to the pishet yadayim v'raglayim.
Paper when we go bow down.
Right. So the kamashir shehiyah, what would be, practically speaking, how much time does that take? Pliga bar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Nachmani v'chadi imay manu. Reb Shimon ben Pazi v'amr Reb Shimon ben Pazi v'chadi imay manu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Nachmani v'amr Reb Shmuel ben Nachmani. Chad domer k'memer dahi psuka v'chad domer k'mi v'yichru l'seifa. One says the time it takes you to say the entire pasuk that he's about to quote, and one says from the middle of the pasuk of the word vayichru to the end. What's the pasuk? V'chol b'nei Yisrael royim beredas ha'eish v'chvoid Hashem al haboyis vayichru apayim arza al haritzpa v'ishtachva v'hoides l'Hashem ki tov ki l'olam chastoi. I'm assuming if you record yourself telling this, saying this pasuk, I'm assuming it's saying it on times 1 speed. If you put it times 2, then it's not going to be there. Today, like how the amount it takes you to say Shalom Aleichem Rabbi Maria. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could say it now. But anyway, the Gemara says, let's finish off with this. Brayse Tana Rabbanon Kida. What's Kida? There's a third type. There you go. Kida is this. A special thank you to Rocky for generating these images. It's incredible.
That's exactly what I said.
Wow, it's exactly yoga. Yeah, he did yoga this morning, and then I asked him
I did yoga work this morning. This is what it looked like.
I asked him to generate this image. This is fantastic. Because what is it? Zut Gemara, Brayse v'chein oim v'tiket v'sheva apayim eretz. Wow, she must have been very, she could have, it's very acrobatic. Flexible. Kriya al Huh?
Very expensive.
This is an illness, by the way. This is not normal.
That some people, I think the Gemara Bracha says that very few people can do Kida.
This is by Awud Levi. He tried to do it. He was
Sukkah. Gemara Sukkah says it, yeah?
So he
Simcha ben Sheva.
he suffered.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ooh, wow. Okay, I see where it brings. Raka Noshem Watam Misigol. Look at Kida, Sukkah, and Gimel. We have to look up the Gemara inside, but very few people are able to do it. But Shavuos was one of them. And what is it? V'cheinu Omer? It says, okay, well no, Kriya al Abrikayim. Kriya is going on your knees. V'cheinu Omer Mikroy al Birkav. And Shtachavos is Pishi Dai Breglayim. V'cheinu Omer Avoy Nove Ani Ve'imcha V'chechol Shtachavos L'cha Artso. All right, those are the three forms of submission, I would say. Yeah, three forms of submission. Okay, we'll continue this from tomorrow. Do we not tomorrow? What's Shabbos, yeah.